Hello and welcome to today's Take, Nine's brand new podcast hosted by me, Jane Azzopardi. Every morning during the week I bring you the headlines and breaking news on Nine's Today Show. But in this podcast we dig a little deeper, going behind the headlines to give you perhaps a different perspective. And this week there is only one story that everyone is talking about.
Erin Patterson has been found guilty of the murders of Doningale Patterson and Heather Wilkinson and guilty of the attempted murder of Pastor Ian Wilkinson.
Let's get you now to breaking news from Australia. The jury in the so-called mushroom murder trial, that has reached a verdict.
A jury has found a woman guilty of murdering her relatives after serving them a beef Wellington meal.
Erin Patterson is a murderer. After 7 days of deliberations, a jury of 12 men and women today convicted the mother of two.
As we go to where she is locked inside a maximum security prison where she could spend the rest of her life.
Well, I have no doubt that you have seen and read a lot about Erin Patterson and that infamous beef Wellington lunch in the last couple of years, and particularly in the wake of Monday's 4 guilty verdicts. But the one question that no one has been able to answer is why. The only person who truly knows the answer to that is right now contemplating spending the rest of her life in a women's prison on the outskirts of Melbourne. But our guest today is someone well equipped to help us understand the complexities, the psychology and the how and why behind it all. Dr. Xanthi Mallett is a forensic anthropologist and criminologist and the author of several books including Mothers Who Murder and Reasonable Doubt. Xanthi, welcome to today's Take.
Hello.
Now, you, like everyone else in this country, would have found it really hard to escape the so-called mushroom murder trial, as we've all been calling it. So first of all, I want to get your reaction to those 4 guilty verdicts that we heard this week.
Well, I must say I wasn't really trying to escape it. I was avidly watching, like many people. It was certainly a water cooler conversation, wasn't it? Everywhere you went,
Absolutely.
People were talking about Erin Patterson. Every time I went out with the dog, everyone was asking me what I thought about Erin Patterson. And, you know, it could have gone either way, though. So people say, were you surprised by the verdict? I'm never actually surprised generally by jury verdicts now. You just never know how they're going to go. We're not in that jury room. We don't hear the deliberations. It could have gone either way. My biggest fear was actually that it would end in a mistrial. Because they couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. And I thought that would have been awful for everybody involved, most importantly, the Wilkinson-Patterson family. So I was glad they reached a verdict. I think on balance, you know, I did agree with it. My personal opinion doesn't really matter. The jury made that decision, but, you know, my sense is it was the right decision. I'm just very happy they made one at all.
So you mentioned people talking to you when you're out walking your dog. What is it about this case, Xanthi? Why have we all been so fascinated with it, do you think?
You know, I think the primary thing is Erin Patterson herself. She is so, I described her in a conversation piece as vanilla, right? She is so average, nondescript. She could be your neighbour who you would chat to but not really take much notice of. And it happened in this quiet little town. It's the poison and the kind of intrigue that comes with that. And everything as it unfolded, you know, the impression you get of Erin Patterson is that she's innocuous, harmless, you know, just like a beef Wellington. And clearly she's anything but. That town was harbouring what transpired to be a mass murderer. She killed 3 people and attempted to kill a 4th. So it's all of that. It's like this juxtaposition between everything that looks like the picture of normalcy against what was anything but normal. You know, it was deep, it was dark, and it was premeditated.
So we're going to get into all the psychology of that, but first of all, I want to point out, we cannot forget that there is a family at the centre of all this.
Yes.
3 people have died in a terrible way. One person has survived after weeks in hospital and losing his own wife. Erin's children now have effectively lost their mother as well as their grandparents. So before we get to Erin herself, how do the Patterson and Wilkinson families deal with not just the loss of their loved ones, but it happening in such a heinous way and such a public way?
Yeah, that's going to be really difficult. I've worked with lots of families where it's what we call an intrafamilial crime. So a crime that happens within a family, one family member killing or harming another. Exactly. So that's very difficult for the family to reconcile with. There'll be breakdowns within that family. Some people have supported Erin, believed entirely in her innocence, and this is going to come as a real shock that in fact she was guilty of these crimes. And so it really causes fractures. And remember, they're still grieving. They've lost multiple members of the family. You know, Ian Wilkinson's life is never going to be the same. Physically, he had a liver transplant and he lost his wife. And you've got Simon Patterson, who's now going to try and father these two children whose mother killed his parents. You know, this is so complex. They're going to take a long time to get over this, to really reconcile with this verdict. I hope it will give them some level of finality. It won't give them closure, but it will give them some finality. This part of the process is over, and they can at least start to try and move forward.
Yeah, it is really hard to imagine how they will be doing that. We, you know, without question, wish those families well. In terms of this case, as you mentioned, you know, so much of the fascination has been with Erin herself and her behaviour and her, if I can say it, her oddness. So let's go right back to the beginning. I want to play you the tearful interview that she gave very soon after that deadly lunch.
Erin, can you tell us what happened on Saturday?
What happened on Saturday was devastating. It's a tragedy what's happened.
Can you tell us about the meal that you cooked?
I'm so devastated by what's happened, by the loss of Don. Don is still in hospital, the loss of Ian and Heather and Gail, who were some of the best people that I've ever met. I'm devastated. I love them. And I can't believe that this has happened, and I'm so sorry.
Xanthia, I'm sure you've seen that interview many times now. What do you make of it?
I have seen that interview a few times, but I actually remember the first time I saw that interview, and you described it as teary. Well, that was certainly what we were meant to feel and think when we looked at her, wasn't it, as she stood there. However, you know, when she's wiping her eyes, there were in fact no tears there. And I remember thinking when I watched that, this is interesting. This is a woman who's trying to portray, you know, anxiety and distress, and yet I didn't actually see or really feel that from her. And I thought that was interesting. And I actually thought at the time, you should not be talking to the press. This is not a good look. I would just stay away from the press if I were you, because you're giving an impression and it's not a good one.
I mean, so many times though, I'm thinking back over the years, so many killers have given interviews like this, where they sort of profess their innocence at that early stage. What's the psychology behind that? Why do people do it?
I think some people are quite enjoying the attention, and that was the impression I got from later interviews that Erin did, obviously before she was arrested, that she was actually quite enjoying this. They were all focused on her. It was me, me, me. How is this impacting me? I can't leave home because of the press pack and all the attention. Me, 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 me. And I thought, again, that's a bit odd, but she did seem to be warming up to it. She kept talking to the press, and I was thinking, the average person, if they're genuinely distressed and worried about their loved ones who were at the time very unwell in hospital, very unwell, and whether she did it intentfully or not, you would feel guilt, surely, that you cooked a meal that led to this outcome. People are dying because of something you did, even if it was an accident. There was no sense of that. There was no sense of remorse or guilt or sympathy for any of the victims. And is that something that I think will stay with me going forward, that you can read a lot into those interviews, and I think people who give them need to be very cautious, because it gives a strong impression and it lasts forever.
Absolutely. And this is also the early stage when she starts lying to police, or even starts lying to the medical staff about where the mushrooms came from. What does that say about her?
Well, you know, she seems to be basically a compulsive liar, if I want to put it like that. I mean, it seems to be almost her go-to. And, you know, the lies stacked up, and many of which were quite easy to demonstrate as untruths. And so I think that was part of her undoing. And I know the judge was very clear that she was not on trial for being a liar, and that's absolutely correct. She was on trial for the murders and attempted murder. But how can you believe a woman when there's such a litany of lies? You know, how do you pick apart what might be a grain of truth in there? And I think the jury found that impossible, and it started so early. It started at the hospital in those very early days.
And it comes back to her type of personality. You know, everybody has an opinion on her at the moment, it seems, and there have been several psychologists who have written saying they think she has narcissistic personality disorder. The doctor who was the first to treat her initially has been quite vocal. He even described her as evil and sociopathic. I want to play you now a little bit of an interview that she gave to the Today Show on Wednesday morning. Sorry, that the doctor gave to the Today Show on Wednesday morning. Chris Webster joins us now live from Palm Cove to share his chilling experience. Good morning to you, Chris. Thank you so much for your time this morning. So what did she seem like to you? Because I think part of the fascination that everyone has had with this case is just she seems like such an unlikely murderer. When you got to meet her in the situation that you met her in, how did she come across to you?
Impassive. She doesn't express emotion and exhibit body language to a level where it's possible to get a read on her. She is not sort of scary in the sense of menacing, physical, imposing, but she feels like she doesn't exist on the same sort of level of reality as most of us humans do. So there is an eerie sort of disquiet that you have in her presence, but it's not the typical sort of scary ogre type fear that you have. It's more visceral than that. It's sort of, her oddness gets under your skin and penetrates your brain, and just it's not pleasant to be around her. She's an odd person.
So Xanthi, we know that Erin hasn't been formally assessed by a psychologist at this stage, but of all the things about her that are in the public domain, how would you describe her personality?
Well, I must say, I mean, as you say, she hasn't been assessed. I'm hoping that might be part of the sentencing process. The judge may offer that, or she may be offered that, a psych evaluation, see if there's any mitigating factors the judge needs to take in account at sentencing. But my first impression of her goes back to those early interviews she did. Attention seeking, she seems to want to control the narrative. And so I think everything she does is very controlled, and she's definitely got an agenda that she is trying to put across. And I think she thinks very carefully about how she responds to things. And that was borne out in court when she gave her evidence. I thought she did very well initially giving her evidence. She was very controlled. She showed appropriate emotion, but there weren't any histrionics. She didn't. It wasn't performative, I wouldn't say, obviously, but it did start to break down as she was challenged. And I think that happened because she wasn't in control of the narrative when she was under cross-examination, and she was being pushed, and she didn't like it. So to me, she comes across as a very controlling personality who very much wants to paint a picture and doesn't like it when that picture is challenged.
We've heard too from people who worked with her when she was in the air traffic control space, and they say she used to lie about leaving work early and those sorts of things, so that those sorts of characteristics seem to go way back.
Yes, and again, I mean, this is hearsay. I'm not suggesting those people are lying at all, but everyone who's kind of ever known Erin is kind of coming out and sharing these stories now.
Yeah, there's a view of hindsight, isn't there? Like, they're
thinking
this now.
Confirmation bias, we're looking at this, did I know her? Did she do anything weird that really supports now what I'm thinking? So we have to be a little bit cautious there. However, it wouldn't surprise me if we generalize it. If we look at personalities that seem similar to Patterson's, it wouldn't surprise me if lying is part of their MO, as it were. They're people with these kind of traits are often very manipulative, very scheming, very controlling, and lying is part of getting what they want. So they may tell a lie, and if that one doesn't quite work, they'll just adapt it slightly and change the narrative to try and get people to do what they want them to do. So lying seems to go along with her personality type.
The defence, their answer to this is that she didn't lie because she was guilty. She lied, maybe because she was nervous, or because the police were asking questions, or because she was uncomfortable about what happened and being put under the microscope. But the jury clearly didn't believe that. I mean, does that hold any weight?
Well, people do lie, when they do fear suspicion. Plenty of people who are entirely innocent lie because they fear an outcome. You know, many people who would be interviewed by the police as potential persons of interest may not be totally genuine. I think the police would tell you with what they tell them because they're fearful, even if they have had nothing to do with it. So people do lie. I mean, I can't sit here and say I've never told a lie. If I don't want somebody to know something for a reason, you know, people are people. And so I think that is totally reasonable that people will tell untruths at times under pressure if they're anxious. I think it was just the number of lies, the premeditation that the Crown demonstrated, the purchasing of the dehydrator, the lying about foraging. You know, it just, people lie, but then there's scale. And she lied about the cancer diagnosis. You know, there's no evidence she had bulimia, you know, even though it should have been easy to prove, but nothing she said was actually supported by evidence, and that's the problem.
I want to also talk about her actions both before and after the lunch. I mean, I'm talking about things like going out on that drive, checking herself out of hospital really early, the whole thing with the resetting of the phones and changing the factory settings and moving the SIM cards, as well as the media interviews that she did. What does all that sort of behaviour say about her and her guilt, potentially?
Yeah, well, obviously each of these things in isolation, you know, you were looking at a whole picture here. Certainly the mobiles really struck me because, you know, I don't think most people, most middle-aged women, you know, mums, know how to do factory resets. I've only done it when I've like returned a work phone or given a phone to someone else, and not because I'm trying to hide anything, but there is a privacy issue there, but also because, you know, if you're giving a phone to someone, they need it empty. But I have to look up how to do it. I don't know how to do it by distance, and I certainly wouldn't do it if I was under investigation and a phone was in police custody. You know, the fact that she's doing these things does suggest she had something to hide.
So, I mean, we'll never know the answer to this, but I want to look into the potential whys of why she might have cooked that death cap mushroom lunch. The prosecution highlighted that there was a strained relationship between Erin Patterson and her estranged husband, and that maybe had a frustration that she had with his parents. From your expertise, when we do have these cases where there isn't a clear motive, but we've got kind of these sort of factors on the sideline, you know, what sort of scenarios are at play there in trying to work out what a motive might be?
Well, I think all we can look at is those facts, you know, the texts that were submitted to show those tensions within the family, because obviously, you know, she had some issue with those individuals and potentially Simon as well. Otherwise, she wouldn't have cooked that lunch. But as you say, unless we talk to Erin, we'll never actually know why from her perspective. But I think, you know, bigger picture, is there really any reason that Erin Patterson could give that could in any way justify what she did? So no matter what the motive, no matter what the reason, it is never going to satisfy us, because it can never be satisfactory. The harm that she caused, you know, poisoning is such a cruel way to kill people. It's drawn out 5-6 days. What they went through is so awful that no reason could ever help a rational person to understand why she did what she did.
Absolutely. You mentioned the premeditation, which is something the prosecution also pointed out. Things like purchasing and using a food dehydrator and then dumping it, as well as the phone records relating to the foraging of the mushrooms. How does that kind of help us perhaps understand her mindset, even if we don't particularly know her motive?
Well, it certainly demonstrates that this was rational. As my friend Tim Watson-Monroe would say, bad, not mad. You know, these are rational choices. It shows a longevity, you know, pattern behaviour, reasoned behaviour. This is not somebody who could have ever argued they were in the middle of a psychiatric break, for example, because, you know, it shows a pattern of reason, logical thought. Now, not maybe reason and logic that you and I can understand, because how could you want to do that? However, from her perspective, this pattern of behaviour obviously made sense to her end game. So it does demonstrate that she was reasoned and logical when she was committing those acts.
So does that mean that she's potentially a sociopath?
Again, I mean, without a formal assessment.
I know you're
by a
reluctant to go there.
Yeah, I am, because, you know, some of the things I'm seeing written are causing me some, concern. You know, we may be looking at appeal at some point. There's the distant spectre potentially of a retrial. I'm not saying that there's going to be a retrial, but in my mind, I'm always conscious that that is a potential part of our legal system. I just don't want to be one of those people who says something, you know, that I can't substantiate.
Yeah,
and so until she's evaluated, I think we have to hold tight, but I hope she is, and maybe that expert report will help us understand her mindset.
And people are going to make their own conclusions when they put all these different factors and things together. Well, let's steer away from the psychology for a moment, or maybe not. I mean, I want to talk about the fact that she actually took the stand and gave evidence in her murder trial, because not many accused murderers seem to do that. Why do you think she did it?
I think she wanted her moment in court, actually. I think it comes back to controlling that narrative. I think she wanted to have a say. She wanted to stand there and express what she wanted the jury to believe. And I think she wanted the opportunity potentially of being cross-examined. You know, maybe she did want to challenge some of those assertions that the Crown put forward. For me, she looks very meek and mild, but I just get the sense there's a lot more going on underneath there. And this is a woman who likes to be in charge, who likes to be in control, and who doesn't like to be challenged without the opportunity to have her say.
There are so many people who have spoken about her, saying that she is very intelligent. What did you make of her time on the stand? What do you think we learnt about her?
Yeah, I mean, certainly she seemed very controlled. She, you know, I've been told she was doing like deep breathing, and she'd obviously planned how she was going to approach it. Certainly under cross-examination, if she was asked a question she didn't understand, that she asked for clarity around that. So I think she handled that very well. She certainly is intelligent. I just don't think, and if we broaden it out to criminals generally, often they think they're very smart, and they may be, but they have to outsmart not only very seasoned detectives who really know what they're doing, but all of the experts they can call on as well. And so for any person who's committed a serious or violent crime intentionally, it's very hard to get away with it, because they have to outmaneuver all of those experts with all of that expertise. So Erin Patterson may be intelligent, but obviously not intelligent enough to outthink all of the experts and the investigators.
No, a lot has also been made, Xanthi, of the fact that she barely flinched when those guilty verdicts were read out. What does that say?
Again, I think that plays into this controlled personality. I think she had set herself for whichever outcome was coming. That, you know, if she didn't want to be that person who broke down, who cried, she'd already decided what face she wanted to show the media and show the world, because she would have been very aware that literally the world was watching. And I think she wanted to appear stoic and in control in that moment.
So a person who has that sort of controlled personality, what do you think, how do you think she'll be handling life in prison?
Well, prison is pretty tough. And for somebody like Erin Patterson, you know, she's not from the wrong side of the tracks. You know, she's not somebody who's grown up in and out of prison, who knows how it works, who understands the dynamics. This is a rough place, and it's going to be so different to anything she's previously experienced. I think she's going to have a really hard time readjusting to her new life, and she is going to be in there for a very, very long time.
Yeah, we will find out in about a month or so, I think. Now, we know that she's always maintained her innocence. As you've alluded to, there is the chance that she will appeal the verdict or the sentence, or both. Do you think she is likely to continue to maintain her innocence, however long this can go on for?
I do, and I only base that on this, what appears to be quite a controlling personality. I think that she will maintain her innocence because that's, you know, the picture that she's painted. I think she will continue to do so because that's the way she's going to continue to control her narrative, whether people believe it or not, but that's what she has presented, and I think she's going to stick to it.
Xanthi, I've spoken to you many times over the years about a whole lot of different cases. It's never anything light and fun.
No.
In particular, though, you've worked with projects aiming to overturn the convictions of convicted baby killers Kelly Lane and Kathleen Folbig. And in Kathleen's case, you were successful. How is Erin Patterson's case different from those?
Well, in Kelly Lane's case, well, first of all, they're all similar in a way in that they're all women who were accused. And I do think we have a different response when a woman is accused of a violent crime. It's almost like, well, we're meant to be nurturers, and that seems so out of context. And I think that, you know, that could be seen at play here. Everyone always describes her as a mother, as if to say, how could a mother have done this? And that is a good question, you know. So Kelly Lane, I think, suffered the same kind of gendered lens through which people viewed that. But with Kelly's case, accused and obviously found guilty of murdering Tegan at 2 days old, there's no body, there's no motive, there's no evidence, and there's no witnesses. So that's literally a case, the only one I've ever seen where it's the total lack of anything which led to a conviction of murder. The most serious crime we have, when we have no evidence a crime was committed at all, except we don't know where Tegan is. So that is totally different. No evidence against her. Kelly did tell lies, but no evidence of a crime. And in Kathleen's case, it was the number of children who died over that 10-year period. 3 children she was found guilty of murdering, 1 of manslaughter. That was overturned over 20 years later when science demonstrated that there was genetic factors which predisposed those children to early death. But in each case, if you looked at each child's death in isolation, there was medical evidence at the time. So even before the science backed it up, back in 2014 when I wrote about it, I said there's reasonable doubt. And there always was in Kelly's case, there remains reasonable doubt, and there was in Kathleen's case. Unfortunately in Kathleen's it may have taken 20 years, which is awful, but it was finally overturned and she was acquitted.
And that's clearly not the case here, because there are lots of witnesses and plenty of evidence that the police were able to present. Finally, Xanthi, and this is the $64,000 question. Do you think we will ever know why this happened?
I think the psych evaluation may give us some indications, and that's all I can say. I think understanding more about Erin Patterson as a person may help us get closer to answering that question.
Do you think she will be, you know, knowing the personality type, do you think she will be reading to, watching and listening all the things being read about her, and how will she be kind of responding to that in her own mind?
If she has access to it, yes, I think she will. I think she will probably be quite angry by a lot of the coverage because of her personality. But, you know, it's difficult to know how she'll be responding. At the moment, she's going to be simply trying to readjust to her life in prison and knowing that she's going to stay there for the foreseeable future.
And waiting for that sentencing. Dr. Xanthi Mallett, thank you for joining today's Take.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. If you've liked what you've heard today, please do subscribe and give us a rating. We'd also love to hear from you if you have any feedback or ideas on what we should cover next. I'm Jane Azzopardi. I will see you bright and early with the rest of the Today team. I hope you have a great day.